All is not well in Great Britain, where it's been a rather torrid year for the Tories, also known as the Conservative Party in the UK. Among the larger polycrises that haunt the general ethos of our times, the Tories are grappling with their own set of polycrises, from a crisis of leadership to sky-high inflation to a sluggish economy to an uncontrolled migration and most of all, a crisis of identity. Recently, the Conservative government of Indian origin Prime Minister Rishi Sunak sacked its most visible minister from his cabinet, Indian origin Suella Braverman, for being more unapologetically conservative than the Conservative Party can probably afford right now. However, in his attempt to damage control her blatantly conservative and often distasteful remarks on immigrants in general and on British police bias recently, Sunak surprised everyone. The surprise didn't come from his decision of sacking Braverman, which was by and large expected after her public defiance of the PM office and disregard to ministerial responsibility in refusing to edit her infamous article where she criticized the British police. The surprise actually came from who he chose to bring in as Foreign Secretary. A forgotten David Cameron, who had retired from active politics after he had lost Brexit referendum as PM in 2016. So Suella's ouster and Cameron's return was done amid a larger cabinet reshuffle. Her Interiors Ministry was given to Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, and David Cameron was brought in as the new Foreign Secretary. Bringing back Cameron to political limelight intrigued many. Sunak is from the pro-Brexit camp when he served as the finance minister under Prime Minister Boris Johnson. On the contrary, David Cameron's PMship ended after he lost the Brexit referendum. So, long story short, the political economic visions of these two men are completely out of sync. Cameron was known to have a pro-China policy as PM in tandem with Obama administration's China engagement. Sunak, on the other hand, has projected himself as a China hawk ever since he became the PM in 2022. In fact, the surprise winner of this cabinet reshuffle might soon be Beijing, and it adds another layer of asynchrony to Sunak's united cabinet. Check out, for instance, David Cameron's promotion of China-backed development in Sri Lanka over the years that has increased concern, and some reports have called him a pawn for Xi Jinping. But that's not the only problem with Cameron's returns. The bigger issue is an unelected Prime Minister has brought an unelected Foreign Minister. And this complicates the accountability quotient of David Cameron. Public accountability is the hallmark of democratic governance. Resting in political isolation, David Cameron was not an elected member of Parliament to have political accountability in the first place. But in order to be made the Foreign Secretary, he was first made a Lord, the upper unelected chamber of the British Parliament, which is rare but definitely not unprecedented in the UK. Therefore, technicality aside, Rishi Sunak is essentially an unelected Prime Minister bringing on an unelected Foreign Secretary to manage electoral performance in upcoming general elections, but with no mechanism yet to ensure his public accountability and scrutiny until then. And that is something that the British people have not taken well. The only possible explanation why this has happened was perhaps Sunak's run-out patience with Braverman's petulance. In that contrast, Cameron's political experience, charisma and pragmatism is expected to bring back confidence, legitimacy and unity to the Tories and a likely resetting of ties with China as well. But all that is easier said than done. The road ahead is rocky. Many have welcomed Suella's ouster, saying that the British people need leaders that would unite communities rather than create fault lines. Now, heartwarming as it might seem, the real issues before British politics are a far cry from such politically correct naivety. And that is where danger for Sunak lingers. Suella's ouster has shredded the optics of ministerial unity in Sunak's cabinet in ways that will impact the Conservatives' prospects in the upcoming general elections in 2024. Cameron's political experience regardless. Only a month ago, a suave and smiling Sunak had put together a show of solidarity and the long-term future of his cabinet in Manchester. A month later, he sacked his most visible minister and reshuffled the same cabinet he showcased as united and able to play a long innings. Rishi has risked quite a lot by this decision of ousting her. Braverman does have pockets of support within the party. Her support comes from the Conservatives' Common Sense group with John Hayes and his supporters. She's also associated with the chairmanship of the European Research Group that made her a staunch Brexiteer. So Conservative PM's guest appearances have been nothing short of a spectacle in British parliamentary politics between 2016 and 2022. David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and finally Rishi Sunak. An accidental prime minister in every sense of the term, Sunak had the twin tasks of saving Britain from economic peril and a crippling disorder in managing asylum seekers. The first task he took upon himself along with the finance minister Jeremy Hunt, and the second he gave to Braverman. Sunak's successful stint as exchequer, that is the finance minister, under Boris Johnson was less to do with his innovative decisions of hiking public spending and more to do with the Bank of England that enabled it by keeping inflation low by buying government debt. Those were the COVID years. Then inflation started to skyrocket and Sunak was tasked to rein it in. But the favourable fiscal environment had changed by the time he took over as Prime Minister. A year later, the country's economy remains in a downward trend and prospects of recovery look gloomy amid unending conflicts in Ukraine and now in West Asia. Now, the second challenge, which is policy planning for the asylum seekers. Braverman was given the task of effective immigration control, discursively referred to as stopping the boats. She had been of the opinion for long that illegal migration cannot be curbed within the current British legal framework. Sunak's cabinet's policy on Rwandan asylum seekers, known as the Rwanda Plan, brought international attention to this legal deadlock. As Interior's Minister, she had been pressing for legislative reforms. And as luck would have it, a day after her sacking, the apex British court ruled that Sunak's plan of deporting asylum seekers back to Rwanda was unlawful and vindicated Braverman's apprehensions. Now, Sunak would have to do what Braverman was asking him to do all this while, that resort to emergency legislation as Prime Minister to block off legal challenges in delivering Rwanda policy. On the contrary, Sunak was busy negotiating a new treaty with Rwanda that would have been relevant but only at a later stage. Braverman was joined by other Tories as well, who pressed Sunak to have the new legislation without delay. The latest ruling has again raised an issue of confidence in Sunak's leadership while adding credibility to ousted Minister Braverman. It could well be the beginning of her own ambitions to run for higher office. Who knows? Coming back, Sunak's cabinet reshuffle came at a time when our own External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, was on an official visit to the UK to discuss bilateral ties in the larger context of India-UK strategic roadmap of 2030 and more specifically, developments around the long-negotiated India-UK Free Trade Agreement. UK has been negotiating an FTA with the US as well. And Sunak administration would want to show at least one successful FTA before the elections. From India's perspective, New Delhi-London trade has an export advantage for India, unlike the trade with China and Russia, where India is running massive trade deficits. It's also regarded as a major step forward in taking the bilateral trade to $100 billion by 2030, as per the objectives of the strategic roadmap. While problems remain on import duties of a few items, the question of mobility remains the most contested area. India wants it, and the UK, under Conservatives, is opposing it. Right after taking the role of Interior's Minister, Suella's rather emphatic remark of Indians being the largest group of visa overstayers had irked India. Therefore, from India's perspective, a change in the tone of the government might mean fast-tracking the FTA. Cameron's return is being welcomed by India in contrast to Suella Braverman, who was disliked for her politics being unabashedly insensitive to her family's immigrant roots. But does it mean an assured conclusion of the FTA to India's advantage? I think it's too early to say. The spectrum of crises engulfing the empire where once the sun never set has been daunting. In such times, the moderation formula applied by Sunak may not translate into better electoral performance since the structural problems of British society remain seething as ever. Whether Sunak pulls off a decent electoral performance in about 2 months from now remains to be seen. How will that impact European politics, UK's support to Ukraine, its ties with China, and will it lead to a brand new FTA that fares well on the expectations of both sides? I will be back to discuss that and much more. Stay tuned.